fascinating. I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
Most illogical.
Aye, sir.
Well, that was different. Yep, lousy, but different.
Places, please, and here we go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, bears, Talaxians, and things, to episode 118 of the MuppeTrek Podcast. I'm Jarman.
And I'm Steve. We're here to compare, contrast, and confer about our two favorite franchises. Jarman, remind the fine folks and us what those are.
It's been a while since we've recorded. Yes, the Muppets and
right.
Star Trek. And we do one-to-one reviews, the Muppet Show and Star Trek The Next Generation.
And this week we have the Muppet Show with very special guest star Wally Boag and Next Generation episode, Too Short a Season.
Yes, the season was too short, my friends.
But before we get to that, Jarman, I hear we have a piece of feedback.
Yes, from Facebook, we had someone comment, and there's someone very familiar and dear to our hearts. It is Steve's mom. Hooray!
Ah, Steve's mom.
I think she's been a long-time listener, but never commented, I don't think, on one of our episodes, as far as I can remember.
Maybe once before.
And she said, It was in regards to our last episode, which had a very questionable guest, so we didn't want to talk about that guest on the Muppet Show. So your mom said, I thought you handled this Muppets episode just right. So
well,
thanks.
Good.
Thanks so much.
I am also happy with where I landed and decided what to do.
Yeah, I think we phrased things well. And we're glad that Steve mom agrees.
Yeah.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks.
Well, let's see what my mom thinks about this week's episode with special guest star Wally Boag.
Yeah, who is this guy, Steve?
Okay, so this is a weird one even for the Muppets.
Yeah.
So Wally Boag was an American performer who was best known for being the lead in the original Golden Horseshoe Revue, a 45-minute stage show that ran 5 times a day at Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
Walt Disney loved Boag's and helped him through his career. He did multiple voices, including Jose in the Tiki Room, and he actually wrote most of the Tiki Room show. And when Disney World opened, he took the review, shortened it, and got it all started up in Disney World, but then eventually went back to Disneyland after 3 years and then retired at 81.
Dang.
He holds, at least as far as I know, the Guinness World Record for most stage performances of any type, because over the years, doing as many performances a day as he did, he estimated did the show 32,000 times.
Oh my God.
The same 45-minute show 32,000 times. Oh my God.
That's too much.
You hear about actors going crazy like 8 months into a 12-month contract on Broadway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I just saw a TikTok of with Jason Alexander of Costanza fame talking to.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, I just watched that today. That's so funny.
He was like, I signed it for 14 months, and by 8 months, I was just going to lose.
Done.
But what's he up to this week on the Muppet Show? Well, this week, I'm not going to say there is no backstage plot, but there is close to no backstage plot. Kermit introduces a very special vaudeville-inspired show because Wally is there. But first we get the Flying Zucchini Brothers and their cannonball act, and they go booma booma into the ceiling. Kermit rapidly introduces another act, Lottie Lemon and her singing wig. She sings the song Just Squeeze Me and then gets booma booma'd as the Falling Zucchini Brothers finally come down. Kermit introduces Wally while boasting about the 32,000 performances. Wally hits the stage as a traveling balloon artist. He rattles rapid fire shtick, including one about him burning to death in a fire. I kid you not. This joke happened. He complains that he had more balloons. He doesn't know what all happened to them. And then all the Muppets come out just covered in balloon art because they stole his balloons. Kermit introduces Foo-Foo and Miss Piggy. They're accompanied by Rolf on piano. She is joined by Foo-Foo, who's played by a real dog and then miraculously transforms into a puppet. Piggy asks Foo-Foo to do math, what 2 + 2 is, but Foo-Foo gets it wrong, and she blames Rolf for it. Kermit introduces then the Leprechaun Brothers, which is the Swedish chef Animal and Beaker, who cobble together Danny Boy, singing at various levels of volume and comprehension. Kermit introduces Wally one more time, who comes out and plays the bag bird, a bagpipe with googly eyes and bird legs. He plays some horrendous bagpipe music with jokes in between. He gets the band to join in, but it really doesn't get better. After this, we get a number that was cut from the Disney version, so I had to find it on YouTube, and it's called the Ying Tong Song. A man in bed recounts a gibberish song that his mother used to sing to him, and while it's like, I'll say mildly culturally insensitive, it was as bad, if not more okay, than some of the other stuff that has been left in. So it was hard for me to tell why it was cut necessarily, because other stuff equally so has made it.
I figure it's the weird like UK version, US version thing, and that's why it wasn't in there, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I do not know. I just know it wasn't the Disney Plus version. I had to go find it. Kermit introduces Dr. Salamander, a hypnotist, and Newt. Pops gets dragged on stage as a volunteer. He falls asleep before he can be put asleep. He then levitates, but he plummets because he wakes up. Kermit introduces Wally one final time, who comes out to do the world famous Western sketch, quote unquote. Wally is Pecos Bill. He does some gun tricks. He gets hit in the mouth and spits out a seemingly unending amount of teeth. As they wrap up a brilliant musical number. Kermit thanks Wally one last time. Wally comes out and loses even more teeth. And that is what we call the Muppet Show. So, Jarman, what did you think of this week's episode with surprise special guest Wally Boag?
Well, I went down a rabbit hole. I don't normally do this of like, who is this guy? And so I also found trivia that was kind of interesting that he, while working at Disneyland, he worked right alongside a young man named Steve Martin, who was working at like the little magic shop across the way. So like, he kind of took Steve Martin under his wing and taught him about balloon art and stuff like that. And they even comment that
I didn't put that together, but that makes perfect sense.
And like when Steve Martin came on the show, he even did balloon art on the Muppet Show when he was the host. And he learned that from Wally Boag. And they were like friends until he died. Like he went to events to honor Wally Boag and stuff. He would be there. And also apparently those teeth he was spitting out are lima beans. That's a thing he did for his act all the time, was spitting out teeth that were actually lima beans, which is really weird. But anyways, I thought he was really fun and good at what he does. Like you said, he did the show, that same act thousands of times. You can tell because he was very confident. The lines came out like super fast and efficiently, and you could hear what he was saying well, and it was snappy and fun. And it was, like grandpa cheesy humor, but it was kind of endearing in that sort of way. And it was very fitting for the Muppet Show with that kind of vaudevillian style of behavior and accents, that kind of thing. When he came out for the first time on stage, he just shot two guns and for no apparent reason, even before he was in like the cowboy costume. It's just his first time on stage, he shoots two guns. Like, what the fuck? What's happening? Like that would never fly these days. Yeah, it's like, come out to your audience and shoot guns. Like that is not cool.
Yeah, it's amazing you say that because on YouTube, you can find a recorded version of this from Disneyland in what must be the early 60s. And it's like the same number. Like it is exactly the same.
It's the same one he did 32,000 times.
Yeah. Like this was not, he did do some of the bits he shortened considerably for the Muppet Show. So he knew how to fit it to whatever time slot he had.
Oh yeah, sure.
But otherwise it was like the exact same show. It was crazy.
So they basically had him on for as long as he could possibly, for as much interest as the audience could possibly hold, because there's not much more he can do, I guess, besides this one.
Yeah. And you add to that the like kind of rapid fire nature of the show this week, where it was just Kermit introducing something, only one or two really short moments backstage.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that we didn't get any of our usual sketches, none of the regular numbers. And we had songs, they had spaces to put in Muppet like sketches, but we just didn't do that. We had a different, like having the three guys do the Danny Boy. They weren't any of their regular numbers. They were just in their own, this little number, which is kind of interesting. It was kind of cool. The Pops falling asleep in the hypnosis act really had me chuckling as well. I think that was, for some reason, a highlight for me. And for some reason, I really loved the Foo number with the little dog. It was just really adorable and funny. I don't know why.
Anytime, because we've gotten to see real live dogs a few times on the Muppet Show, and it's always a treat.
Oh, yeah. I think Foo-Foo's been a real dog before, too.
Lena Horne had a dog with her in one of her songs, I remember. And Rolf at one point sings What a Wonderful World, like to a puppy.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
It's like the two other times I can remember dogs, and there must be at least one other. But it's always a treat to have real animals next to the Muppets.
Yeah, and switching it out with a puppet and everything. I mean, so for me, at least, I think this was like a nice, solid middle episode because he was surprisingly entertaining, probably because that act is so polished that it would normally be pretty boring, I think, the silly stuff he was doing, but he is so polished at it that it was like, okay, well, this is entertaining. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think that, honestly, if you look at this episode, it has none of the things I look for in an episode.
Right.
There's very little interaction between him and the Muppets, realistically.
That's true.
It's just him doing shtick. There's none of our normal sketches. There's no backstage plot to speak of. But despite it missing all of these marks, I did find this incredibly entertaining because of the speed.
Breakneck pace. Yeah, that's true.
Breakneck pace, nothing in between, but maybe a minor bit, one or two jokes, and then something was hitting the stage. And even the things that hit the stage, none of them were long. All of them were quick.
And the two slow songs, we had the singing wig was ended short with the guy falling on her. So that was still, it didn't drag. And then the Danny Boy was so ridiculous having them singing that, even though it was slow.
So ridiculous.
Like, even though it was slow, it was like Beaker screaming out the notes and stuff. Like, you didn't notice that it was a slow song because it was so silly. So it was fine.
Because, there was just always, just the premise was so nuts.
Swedish Chef.
So music this week. Speaking of the weird lemon lady, Just Squeeze Me, in 1941, now jazz standard from Duke Ellington and Lee Gaines. It has been covered by a ton of folks, including Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, as well as former Muppet Show guest stars Ella Fitzgerald and Lou Rawls. Danny Boy with lyrics by Frederick Weatherly. Apparently he only wrote the lyrics. The tune for this had been around some years before that, and it was called Londonderry Air.
Okay.
Yep.
Didn't know that.
So, and while Danny Boy often gets associated with Catholic funerals, in 2001, the National Catholic Reporter provided the church's official stance in that it is not to be played during Mass.
Oh.
Sing Danny Boy and all that after the actual funeral is done, but it is not to be done during Mass. The Ying Ting song, this is the one that I had to find on YouTube, written by an actual former Muppet Show guest star, Spike Milligan. I think season 1 or season 2. Apparently, this is one of King Charles III's favorite songs, and he can often be heard singing it while entering or leaving rooms.
That's very weird.
Well, apparently he's notoriously a fan of the Goons, which is the comedy troupe that Spike Milligan got his start in.
Ah, that makes sense.
Predecessors to Monty Python.
Right.
And then Pecos Bill from the 1948 Disney film Melody Time. It's by Daniel and Lang. There was an entire verse cut from the home video release of the movie of Melody Time due to the fact that Pecos Bill is smoking in it. But it has been re-added in the version you can now see on Disney Plus and any of the international movie versions. It's fine, but for the US version only, it got cut because Pecos Bill is a smoker.
Because he's a cowboy. Of course he's a smoker.
That's right. So, Jeremy, what did you think was the best Muppeteering moment this week?
Well, I don't feel like there were any big set pieces or complicated numbers this week. So
they really weren't.
I'm just giving it to Foo because such a good girl. Foo gets my favorite Muppeteering moment.
Fair. No, that's fair. That was a good bit. The switch between the dog and the puppet was fun.
Yeah.
The dog doing math was funny. I'm going to give it to the Leprechaun Brothers. You're right. There was nothing intense about it or cool effects, but the premise of 3 characters that you can't understand
singing a song,
all performing together, was just too good.
Yeah, it was very silly.
It was just too good.
I want that to be a regular bit.
The fact that it was a song that everyone knows, so you don't need the lyrics. Like
Right.
the audience knows the lyrics, so they get the kick out of what they're making of it. It worked on a lot of good levels.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
So, Jarman, what happened on this week's episode of Star Trek, the original series?
Well, this time around we have
The Next Generation.
The Next Generation. Oh my
next
God.
one.
Too short a
God damn
season.
it, Steve.
So the Enterprise has received word from Karnas, the governor of a planet called Morden 4. It's always a number after their planets. Who would do that? Saying that a terrorist group has taken hostages and they'll only respond to negotiations if an Admiral Mark Jameson from Starfleet comes to do it. So they take Jameson on board, and he's this horrible-looking old man in a wheelchair who's really ornery and stuff. He's with his wife, and he apparently suffers from an incurable disease that causes him to be in the wheelchair. And on their way to the
planet, grow an extra forehead.
And grow 4 foreheads, yes.
3 to 4 foreheads.
And on their way to the planet, he starts to act like he's getting better, which is really weirding everyone out, especially Dr. Crusher, because she knows there's not supposed to be a cure to his disease. And then he starts to even de-age. He's supposed to be 85 years old. He's starting to look younger, more spry. And he eventually explains himself as he starts getting younger and younger. And he says that he went to a planet that has a de-aging concoction that was thought to be a legend, but he found out it's real. He originally got the concoction for both him and his wife, but in his excitement to go on this mission, he just went and took all of it, even though it was supposed to take it over 2 years, and he took 2 doses. So now it's acting very quickly and painfully, and it's not looking good for him, but he's de-aging very quickly. He's also being very cagey about the mission they're on to free these hostages. So he eventually finds out and then reveals to the crew that Karnas is actually the one holding the hostages and there are no terrorists, and that he's doing so in revenge against Admiral Jameson. Because apparently when Jameson was on that same planet 40 years ago on behalf of Starfleet, he was there as a mediator between these 2 warring factions on the planet. And Karnas was the leader of one of those factions, and he wanted weapons from Starfleet so he could end this uprising against him quickly, or he would not cooperate with Starfleet at all. So Jameson thought he was being clever, and he gave weapons to both warring factions so he wouldn't have to pick a side, and hopefully that the war would just end quickly because they had futuristic weapons from Starfleet. But instead, it set them off on a war that would last 40 years. So Karnas eventually figures this out, and now he wants Jameson to pay for what he did, so he's trying to lure him back to the planet. But now Jameson on the Enterprise, he's now a young man at this point from his reverse aging, and he wants to take an away team down to free the hostages by force. And they try to do so with, for some reason, taking all the top officers of the entire ship as the away team. But they're ambushed, and Jameson suddenly falls over ill because the reverse aging's really kicking his ass. So they beam back on board to save themselves. And now Karnas is pissed because he knows they're trying to steal the hostages, and he wants Jameson dead, and then he'll free the hostages. But if not, he'll kill them all. So Jameson agrees to beam down to give himself up to save the hostages. And he beams down Picard and Dr. Crusher. But Karnas doesn't believe that it's him because he looks so young. He's like, who is this guy? But finally, through some convincing from Picard and showing him pictures of his transformation and Jameson pulling it together enough to show him a scar that only Karnas knows about, Karnas is satisfied. But then Jameson dies, succumbing to the effects of taking too much of the wonder de-aging drug too quickly, leaving his aged wife in shambles. And then Karnas then agrees to free the hostages, and he seeks peace with the Federation. And that is the end of too short of a season. So, Steve, what do you think of this episode?
All right. So some things I liked. I like that. I think Marsha Hunt, who played Ann Jameson, his wife, thankfully just added a lot of levity and gravitas to this episode.
I think so.
She was really the highlight of the episode to me. I liked the reveal that Admiral Jameson gave both sides equal weapons, and that was like his bad deed. It reminded me, and I'm not the only person as I look this up, of A Private Little War from the original series.
Yes.
Where the Enterprise goes down and finds that the Klingons have given weapons to one side of a planet. So Kirk, in his interpretation of the right thing to do, gives the other side weapons.
Right.
And it basically ends with them realizing that they have set these two sides on escalating collision courses to destruction.
I didn't even think about that connection, but you're right.
As I looked it up, I'm like, this has been made on comment boards all over the place. I'm not the first person I'm not that smart.
They also referenced the Iran-Contra war in real life too, that this was kind of based off of, they said, but that makes sense too.
And so otherwise, this was a tough episode for me. This was really not a great episode for me.
Mm-hmm.
So the dislikes, things I struggled with a bit. What a terrible decision to instead of casting an old guy,
right,
and being subtle about it, casting like a 20 something and trying to age him to 80 or 90. It was not the fault of the actor. It was a bad friggin' choice.
I agree. That's my first notes.
They should have used two different actors
or three different actors.
Made them look more or less alike. And then at one point transition to the younger guy in some slight old age makeup, in some like slightly older makeup to then de-age him further.
Or have like a 65-year-old guy in some old age makeup a little bit to make him look 85. And then he can age.
And then 65 him.
And then he can age down to like 40 and some 45, and then finally switch over to the younger guy with some older age makeup on. That would have been so much
call,
better.
and it telegraphed exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, this guy's going to de-age, obviously.
Yeah, because why would they give him 3 foreheads?
40 pounds of makeup, yeah.
And then this is one of those things that as we watched it, I was like, why are there 100 different regulations and stipulations to take away command from someone who is clearly impaired, but it's only ever used against Picard or Kirk? It is never used when someone else is in charge and starts doing crazy, stupid things.
And it's always an admiral. Like a lot of the times going forward, maybe not so much in the past, but like going forward, admirals are always doing terrible shit and getting away with it. And like everyone's afraid to do anything to the admirals. I guess they're just really powerful, but still, it is annoying.
I had a tough time going from the stand. And this is one of those telegraph stance things where Beverly Crusher was like, no, there's no known treatment. There is no cure. The only sentence for this disease is death. And the moment they're like, it's a magic drug. And she goes, well, I guess it's a magic drug. like, what? That went real quick. Okay.
Well, she did have the one line earlier that she's like, so he's like, Picard's like, so there's no cure. And she's like, that we know of. Like that's she said. So
I know, but that was so stupid. It just felt it was too big a turn for me.
Gotcha.
And speaking of that, too many double turns in the episode. The Admiral's really disaging and healthy and going to like relive his glory years, but the good guy Karnas is actually the bad guy. But actually, Admiral Jameson is the bad guy, but he feels bad about it. I'm like, oh my god, it was just too many turns in the episode.
That's funny because I put the same thing too, is that I like the concept of the episode, but it was too convoluted and complicated that didn't need to be. Like they could have taken out that whole subplot of Karnas and crap, and he could have just been excited to go on one last mission or something. It could have been any generic mission, but this whole thing with Karnas and the backs, and it was like there's too much going on. Like, yeah, I agree. It was just like,
and then at the end, the redemption arc they gave him was so short that it was meaningless. It all happened in that one scene where it's him in front of the tribunal.
Yeah. Or in front of Karnas.
Or the old guys. Standing where he should have been standing 45 years before, but it was too quick and forced. And because they tried to delay the reveal that he was de-aged, like it was some big friggin' secret, they couldn't start that arc until the very end of the episode.
Yeah.
Just some bad production choices.
Yeah, and I think I read some stuff back about like the Michael Westmore, I think it said it was, who was the makeup guy, and he's became a really famous makeup guy after this.
Yeah, he's the like main judge on Face Off.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shows.
He's a really famous guy now, but he started off with Star Trek, and the first old age makeup he did for the show was Bones on the first episode, where it was Admiral, McCoy. And that didn't look great either because they aged him up.
That kind of looked like this.
Exactly. And this one, they gave him even less time. And so and then when he got to work one day, it was supposed to be half done and it wasn't. And so he had to like do everything really quickly so they didn't delay shooting. And so the first day of shooting was the most makeup. And so it looked like the way it looked, and he was really disappointed with it. But he's like, I didn't have enough time. They didn't give me enough resources. I didn't have time with the actor. Like, he's like, there wasn't much more I could do. So that's why they should have just used an old guy. Like, it would have been so much easier. But yeah, I completely agree. Well, but beyond all that though, I liked enough of the episode that this for me still stays like a middling episode. It didn't bring it down to a trash episode for me, but those things are very jarring and distracting because the makeup is so bad. And such a telegraph, like you said, it's like we obviously know what's going to happen the first time we see that character. It's like, okay, great. So
yeah, why does he look like that?
Why is his face melting?
Yeah, man, it was just bad.
I will say it's taken many years for Hollywood to catch up to making old age makeup look good. Only like in the last 10 years has it looked anywhere near real. Like, old age makeup has always looked terrible. Like, I saw what's his face playing Captain America when he played his old version of himself in Endgame or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, okay, that looks like there might have been some CGI involved too, like mixture with makeup or something, but it looked like that he looks like an old version of himself. Like, that looks real. Like, I'm okay. Finally, they caught up. But anyways, some trivia for this episode.
Well, I mean, to this day, the gold standard is still Gina Davis in A League of Their Own.
Oh, I don't remember that. That was really good.
The opening of and closing of the movie when she is an old lady going back to like the reunion. That is the gold standard for old age makeup and prosthetic.
It's like
this day.
It's like how
if you haven't watched it, go watch it.
They learned how to do this stuff back in the 90s. Like when we had Jurassic Park, CGI looked fantastic, and then it looked like shit for 15 years. Like, I don't know what happened after Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Even if you only have to watch the first 5 minutes of the movie to see it, and it's so good.
Oh, it's a great movie.
So good.
Yeah, I just don't remember the makeup, but yeah, it was a great movie.
Gold standard.
So trivia, DC Fontana was a, wonderful writer for a lot of the original series, and her script for this episode, she wrote originally, was heavily rewritten by a guy named Gene Roddenberry's lawyer, this guy named Leonard Maizlish. And I've listened to a lot of this show about Star Trek behind the scenes stuff, and apparently this lawyer was a terrible guy, and he was just kind of controlling older Gene as Gene was kind of losing more of his faculties. This Leonard Maizlish guy was trying to become a TV writer in addition to being his lawyer, and he was a terrible writer. So Fontana quit the show in protest of this happening on this episode and lodged a complaint with the Writers Guild of America. And the incident also convinced the producer, Maurice Hurley, that Roddenberry no longer knew what he was doing. And so Hurley pressured Roddenberry into handing control of the writing staff over to him because of this episode. This all happened, this whole drama behind the scenes. So Karnas has a phaser from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, a phaser from Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and a modified Klingon disruptor rifle, and a Portal 63 staff from The Last Outpost hanging on his wall behind his desk. Those are all sitting there right there behind his desk.
Wow.
And Michael Pataki, who plays Karnas, also played a Klingon named Korax in The Trouble with Tribbles, that episode, which is pretty cool. And the scenes in which he appeared in 1967 were also used later on in the Trials and Tribulations episode of Deep Space Nine. And so he's been in 3 different decades of Star Trek, basically, which is pretty cool. Wow. Although this episode was supposed to focus on the Jameson character, his name was Clayton Rohner, the actor who played him, the regular cast felt that he didn't work well in the ensemble very well. So the director felt the show was too verbose and had more words than action. And Rohner's makeup during the earlier parts of the show was a source of disappointment, being labeled as a subpar and ineffective, basically. So those things were not well received. It was too verbose. The actor wasn't good with the rest of the ensemble. So there's probably a lot of bad shit happening back there. Admiral Jameson's state-of-the-art 24th century wheelchair was a problem, apparently. It cost the prop department $10,000 to make that shitty wheelchair, but it did not move well enough to be anything more than a hindrance, and the director had to shoot around it. And the property master referred to the wheelchair as a big albatross, basically, throughout the shooting. If you notice, it only moves like one time that we see on screen. The rest of the time, they just kind of, it sits there or gets transported, and that's it. In one of the original scripts by another one of the writers who did a draft on this, Jameson does not die, but he reverts to the age of 14, and he doesn't remember his wife. And he helps the governor, Karnas, and his rival in the negotiations as a 14-year-old. But in the end, Wesley Crusher gives him a tour around the ship, and they become friends because he's 14 now. So that could have been interesting. It's a lot of shit happened in this episode behind the scenes. So, Steve, what are our Trek Connection, Muppet Connections this time?
Oh, boy, do I got some good ones. Well, Wally Boag, his voice and part of the Tiki Room performance can be heard in the 2011 children's classic Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, yes.
The movie that happened. And in the same children's classic, once again, Romeo and Juliet, playing the role of Bill Shakespeare is Patrick Stewart. Bam. And then Wally Boag had a small role in Disney's The Love Bug, which featured Buddy Hackett. Buddy Hackett provided the voice for a character named Louie in one episode of Jim Henson's Dinosaurs.
What a connection. My gosh.
Bam. Worlds collide.
Well, they collide a lot when the episodes are so similar. What do you find similar about these two movies, Steve? Or these two episodes?
Well, both feature disheveled old men. Sleepy, aggravated Pops and sleepy, aggravated Admiral Jameson.
That's very true. Both have a legendary man becoming not exactly as he is expected to be. Admiral Jameson becoming a young man, and Pecos Bill not actually being a great gunslinger, but a doofus.
On a similar note, both feature miraculous regeneration, Jameson de-aging rapidly, and Wally Boag regrowing his teeth over and over again.
That's a good one. Both have a man wanting to pay back a man something he was owed. Karnas wants to seek revenge on Jameson for his actions 40 years ago. He wants to pay him back with revenge. And Pops wants to pay back the doorman that he lent $10 to 10 years ago.
Let's see. That's it. That's what I got.
That was it.
Just two. I was like, I thought I had a third. No, I didn't.
Oh, God.
Transporter malfunction. Transporter malfunction.
All right, it's time of the show where we transport one of the characters to the other episode and vice versa. So what you got for us, Steve?
Trek to Muppets this week. I'm going to bring over old Jameson and put him in the place of Wally Boag, rapidly de-aging as the show goes on and becoming more and more likely host.
That makes sense.
Losing foreheads as he goes.
Trek to Muppets, I'll have Karnas come over to replace Wally Boag because I just want to see him angrily make balloon animals, angrily pay the bagpipes, and angrily spit lima beans everywhere as a cowboy.
Pay for what you've done. Most of Trek, I'm going to bring over the Leprechaun brothers and replace the old council members standing with Karnas. Yeah, because they just stand there and just are ineffective.
Instead, they'll be singing now.
Yeah.
Muppets of Star Trek, I'm going to have Pops come over to replace Admiral Jameson because I want to watch his journey of becoming young again.
I would watch that.
I would too. Yeah.
Adventures of Young Pops.
Young Pops. See what his life is all about. And that brings us to the end of episode 118 of the MuppeTrek Podcast.
Join us next time for the Muppet Show with special guest Johnny Cash.
And the Next Generation episode, When the Bow Breaks.
So from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the MuppeTrek Podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.